I sat in my car outside my parents' colonial home, gripping the steering wheel as I stared at the familiar wraparound porch. The text from my mother still glowed on my phone. Family emergency meeting this Saturday at 4:00 p.m. Please come to the house. It's important. When I'd called asking what was happening, she'd been evasive. Your father feels we all need to talk about your situation. Emily will be there too. My situation. As if my 2-year-old healthcare technology startup was some kind of disease that needed intervention. The irony wasn't lost on me. Just 12 hours ago, at 2:00 a.m., I'd achieved the breakthrough that could change everything. Our AI algorithm had finally reached 95% accuracy in matching rare disease patients with appropriate specialists and clinical trials. I'd called Jasmine immediately, despite the hour. This could be it. Rachel, my business partner had said, her voice vibrating with excitement. With this improvement, we can finally demonstrate real clinical impact at scale. I know, I'd said, feeling a mixture of elation and dread. But my family's called some kind of intervention about the business for Saturday. They're going to try to convince me to shut it down. Now here I was, about to face what I knew would be a family intervention about shutting down Connect Care. Armed with news I hadn't yet had the chance to share, I checked my watch 3:58 p.m. Time to face the music. Rachel Bennett, 30 years old, Stanford computer science and biomedical engineering graduate. That's how I usually introduced myself in business settings. What I didn't mention was growing up in a household where success had only one definition: follow the established path to conventional achievement. My father, Gregory Bennett, was a renowned cardiothoracic surgeon. My mother, Diana, a tenured economics professor. Emily, my sister 3 years older, had just made partner at Sullivan & Morgan, one of Boston's most prestigious law firms. In the Bennett family, we didn't take risks, we calculated outcomes, and chose proven strategies. For 2 years after Stanford, I'd played by their rules. I landed a coveted position at TechLife, working on healthcare initiatives with an impressive salary and exceptional benefits. My parents finally had something straightforward to brag about at country club gatherings. But during a project involving rare disease patients, I witnessed something that changed everything. Patients were literally dying while navigating bureaucratic mazes. Trying to find appropriate specialists and clinical trials, the systems were fragmented, outdated, inefficient. I saw an opportunity to create something that could save lives. Connect Care, an AI-driven platform that could match patients with rare conditions to the right specialists in clinical trials, cutting through months or years of painful searching. When I announced my decision to leave TechLife, my family's reaction was predictably mixed. My mother expressed cautious support. My father was skeptical. The healthcare industry isn't something you can disrupt overnight. Emily simply asked if my company offered health insurance. I brought on Jasmine Washington, a brilliant programmer from TechLife who shared my vision. We rented a tiny office space that doubled as our apartment when we worked too late to go home. Those first months were exhilarating, the freedom to build something meaningful, the late nights coding and refining our algorithm, the moments of breakthrough when difficult problems suddenly yielded to our persistence. But as months passed without significant external validation, the cracks began to show. My boyfriend Timothy, an investment banker who'd initially liked dating the next female tech founder, grew increasingly frustrated. I thought this was going to be more of a quick success story, he admitted during one of our arguments. I'm starting to worry you're throwing away your potential. By the second year, reality hit hard. 2 major funding rounds fell through at the last minute. Our algorithm needed significant refinement to handle the complexity of matching rare disease presentations with appropriate trials. The regulatory landscape proved even more challenging than anticipated. Timothy finally left, saying he needed someone more stable in his life. My family's initial support had curdled into concern, then criticism. Sunday dinners became interrogations about burn rates and user acquisition costs. Emily's steady rise through her law firm provided a convenient counterpoint to my struggling venture. Emily just bought a condo in the city, my mother would mention while I was still eating ramen in my shared apartment office. What my family couldn't see were the small victories accumulating beneath the surface. A breakthrough that increased our matching accuracy by 37%. A successful pilot program with a mid-sized hospital in Chicago. Most importantly, a 12-year-old named Eliza with rare muscular dystrophy who had accessed a life-changing clinical trial through our platform during the Chicago pilot. But those victories felt hollow when your own family couldn't see the value in what you were building. Our current crisis was real. Our primary server had crashed last month, taking our platform offline for 3 crucial days. We'd lost a potential partnership with a research hospital as a result. Our bank account was dwindling, and layoffs for our small team of 5 loomed large. After exhausting other options, I'd swallowed my pride and called my father 2 days ago. We met at his country club, where he sipped scotch and listened to my pitch with clinical detachment. "So you need $50,000 to bridge until your next funding round," he'd clarified, examining me over his glasses the way he might assess a questionable diagnosis. "It's a loan, not a gift," I emphasized. "We have a meeting with Horizon Ventures next month." My father set down his glass. "Rachel, I've supported your adventure for 2 years now. Your mother and I are concerned that you're trapped in a cycle of almost, but never quite making it." "Dad, we're so close to a breakthrough. Our algorithm is performing better than anything on the market. We just need a little more time." He sighed heavily. "I'll discuss it with your mother. But I think what you need isn't more money. It's a reality check." 2 days later came the text about the family emergency meeting. Last night's algorithm breakthrough felt like a cosmic joke. Just as my family prepared to stage an intervention, Jasmine and I had achieved the very milestone that could validate everything we'd been working toward. But there hadn't been time to process it, let alone share it with anyone. As I sat in my car, staring at my childhood home, I couldn't shake the feeling that this meeting would mark a turning point, though I had no idea just how dramatic that turn would be. I pulled into the circular driveway at exactly 4:00 p.m., immediately noticing more cars than expected. Uncle Frank's Mercedes, Aunt Patricia's SUV, Dr. Winston's BMW, at least 5 additional vehicles beyond my immediate family. My stomach tightened. This wasn't a meeting. It was an ambush. The front door opened before I could ring the bell. My mother stood there, her expression a complicated mixture of sympathy and determination. "Rachel, sweetie," she said, hugging me briefly. "Everyone's waiting in the living room." "Everyone?" I echoed, my voice sharp. She avoided my eyes. "Your father feels it's important that we all talk openly about your situation." The living room fell silent as I entered. The scene was surreal, like walking into my own intervention on a daytime talk show. My father stood by the fireplace, clearly positioned as the authority figure. Emily sat primly on the sofa, a legal pad balanced on her knee, already taking notes. Around the room, strategically placed in various armchairs and love seats, were Uncle Frank, Aunt Patricia, my father's colleague Dr. Winston and his wife Margaret, my godmother Judith, and to my shock, my mother's financial advisor, Bradley. "What is this?" I asked, remaining standing despite the conspicuously empty seat placed directly across from my father. My father cleared his throat, his surgeon's composure fully engaged. "Rachel, please sit down. We've gathered as a family because we're concerned about the path you've chosen." "And Bradley is family now?" I asked, nodding toward the financial advisor who had the decency to look uncomfortable. "Bradley is here to offer professional perspective." My father replied smoothly, "Please sit." Reluctantly, I took the seat, feeling like a defendant facing a jury of my peers, except these weren't my peers, and this wasn't a trial I'd agreed to participate in. My father launched into what was clearly a rehearsed speech. "For 2 years, we've supported your entrepreneurial experiment. We've watched you pour your savings, your time, your relationships, and your talents into a venture that shows no signs of viability. As a family, We can no longer stand by while you waste your potential and jeopardize your future." Uncle Frank nodded vigorously, leaning forward in his chair. "Your father asked me to look at your business plan, Rachel. The burn rate is unsustainable without significant investment, which hasn't materialized after 2 years. That's usually a market signal." "You showed him our confidential business documents," I asked my father, incredulity bleeding into my voice. "I showed him what you showed me when you asked for $50,000, my father replied coolly. "And Frank agrees the outlook isn't promising." Aunt Patricia joined the pile-on, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Honey, no one's saying you aren't smart or hardworking, but sometimes the smartest thing is knowing when to cut your losses. I have a friend at Massachusetts General Hospital." "I don't want to work at Mass General," I interrupted, my composure beginning to slip. "Our platform is finally showing real clinical impact. We're helping patients with rare diseases find treatments that could save their lives." "But is it financially viable?" Bradley asked gently, his financial advisor training evident in the careful phrasing. "Even the most altruistic venture needs a sustainable business model." "We're pre-revenue by design," I explained, feeling like I was speaking a foreign language they couldn't understand. "We're building the network and refining the algorithm before full-scale monetization. It's standard for this type of platform." "Doctor?" Winston shook his head with the authority of someone who'd seen it all. "I've seen many medical innovations fail, not because they weren't good ideas, but because they couldn't navigate the regulatory landscape and financial realities of healthcare." My godmother Judith, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke with the privilege of someone who'd known me since birth. "Rachel, we're worried about you personally, too. Timothy was such a lovely young man, and your mother tells me you hardly date anymore. You're working all hours, living in your office." "Timothy left because he wanted to date a status symbol, not an actual person with ambitions," I retorted, my carefully maintained composure finally cracking. "And my personal life isn't up for family debate." Emily, who had been scribbling notes throughout the intervention, looked up with her lawyer's precision. "I have taken the liberty of drafting some options for you," she said, her tone professionally sympathetic. "I have contacts at several tech firms who would be interested in someone with your background. You could leverage your startup experience as an asset, rather than a liability in the job market." "That's very thoughtful, Emily," I said, my voice tight with barely controlled anger. "But I'm not looking for a job. I have one. I'm the CEO of a company that's doing important work." My mother, who had been uncharacteristically quiet throughout the assault, touched my arm with what felt like genuine concern. "Sweetheart, we know you believe in what you're doing, but you've always been so idealistic. Sometimes reality doesn't match our dreams. And that's not failure, it's life." I looked around the room at these people who claimed to love me, yet couldn't see or respect the vision that drove me. The breakthrough from last night felt like a secret weapon I wasn't ready to deploy. "Our algorithm just achieved 95% matching accuracy for certain conditions," I said, my voice gaining strength. "Do you know what that means? It means patients who would otherwise spend years searching for appropriate treatment can find it in days. It means lives saved." My father sighed heavily, the sound carrying all the disappointment of a parent watching a child make poor choices. "Rachel, everyone wants to save the world when they're young, but there are established channels for medical innovation for a reason. If your idea had merit, wouldn't the market have validated it by now?" "The market is broken," I insisted, standing up as my frustration boiled over. "That's exactly why we're building this, and we do have validation from patients, from doctors at our pilot hospitals, from clinical researchers, but not from investors with actual money," my father countered sharply. "Not from people who understand business rather than idealism." Emily nodded in agreement, her legal training evident in her systematic approach. "Rachel, I admire your passion, but passion doesn't pay bills. I've worked systematically toward partnership for 8 years. It took discipline, strategic choices, and sometimes putting aside what I wanted in the moment for the bigger picture. My father gestured toward Emily, his face lighting up with unmistakable pride, a look I hadn't seen directed at me in years. Exactly. Your sister made partner while you play entrepreneur. The words hit like physical blows. The room fell uncomfortably silent as everyone absorbed the harshness of my father's statement. I felt tears threatening, but refused to let them fall in front of this tribunal. I stood up, gathering my purse with as much dignity as I could muster. I think we're done here. Rachel, don't be dramatic, my father started, his surgeon's control reasserting itself. We're trying to help you. No, I responded, finding strength in the clarity of the moment. You're trying to make me into something I'm not. You've never understood what I'm building because you've never really tried to understand. My mother looked pained, caught between loyalty to her husband and concern for her daughter. Rachel, please, your father just wants what's best for you. He wants what he thinks is best for me, I corrected, my voice steady now, despite the emotional turmoil. There's a difference. As I turned toward the door, my phone buzzed urgently in my purse. For a moment, I considered ignoring it. This family tribunal had already consumed enough of my emotional energy, but something made me check it quickly. It was a text from Jasmine. Rachel, urgent. Daniel Rodriguez from Pharmac just called. They want to discuss acquisition. Something about our breakthrough last night. Where are you? I stared at the message, my heart beginning to race. Pharmac Global was one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world. If they were calling about acquisition... As I turned to leave, the strangest thing happened. My mother's phone buzzed loudly in her pocket. She automatically reached for it, glancing down at the notification. Her expression changed from concern to confusion to something approaching shock. Diana, we're in the middle of something important, my father admonished, his authority clearly threatened by the interruption. But my mother was staring at her phone screen, then looking up at me with widening eyes that seemed to see me for the first time in years. Gregory, she said slowly, her economist's precision evident even in her shock. You might want to see this. What could possibly be more important than this family discussion? My father asked, his impatience barely contained. My mother looked directly at me, her voice steady but filled with amazement as she read aloud from her phone. Why is your company valued at $1 billion in the Wall Street Journal? The room froze. Every eye turned to me, expressions ranging from confusion to disbelief to something approaching awe. The carefully orchestrated intervention suddenly felt like a courtroom where new evidence had just overturned the entire case. What? I managed, my voice barely audible above the sudden ringing in my ears. My mother looked back at her phone, blinking rapidly as if the words might change. It's a Wall Street Journal news alert. Healthcare startup Connect Care, valued at $1 billion in potential acquisition talks with Pharmac Global. She looked up at me, her economist's mind struggling to process the information. Rachel, is this your company? I couldn't process what I was hearing. Pharmac Global was one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world. While we'd been in early discussions with their innovation department about potential collaboration, nothing remotely close to acquisition talks had been mentioned, let alone a $1 billion valuation. I need to see that, I said, crossing the room in 3 quick strides, my earlier dignity forgotten in the face of this impossible news. My mother handed me her phone with trembling fingers. Emily was already pulling out her own device, her lawyer's instincts kicking in. Is this some kind of mistake? She asked, though the professional skepticism in her voice couldn't mask her obvious shock. My fingers trembled as I scrolled through the article. According to healthcare technology reporter Malene Torres, Pharmac Global was in advanced talks to acquire Connect Care for an estimated $1 billion, primarily for our revolutionary patient matching algorithm that demonstrates unprecedented accuracy in connecting rare disease patients with appropriate clinical trials. The article went on to quote an unnamed source within Pharmac, saying that our technology could revolutionize clinical trial recruitment and potentially save the pharmaceutical industry billions in failed trial costs while dramatically accelerating rare disease treatment development. As I read, I became aware of several things. Simultaneously, my phone was vibrating constantly in my purse. The room around me had erupted into confused chatter, and my father had moved to read over my shoulder, his expression shifting from dismissal to astonishment with each word. "Rachel," he said, his voice entirely different now, respectful, almost reverent. "Is this accurate?" I finally checked my own phone. 17 missed calls from Jasmine, 5 from our lawyer, Samuel, 3 from a number I didn't recognize with a New York area code. Dozens of text messages and email notifications flooding my screen like a digital avalanche. I don't know, I admitted, my mind struggling to catch up with the reality unfolding around me. "We've been in talks with Pharmac about a potential partnership, but nothing like this. I need to call Jasmine." I stepped out onto the porch, my hands shaking as I dialed my business partner's number. The irony wasn't lost on me stepping away from my family's intervention to deal with what might be the biggest business development of my life. Jasmine answered on the first ring, her voice higher than normal with excitement. "Rachel, finally. Have you seen it? The Wall Street Journal article." "Yes, I just saw it." "What's happening, Jasmine? We weren't in acquisition talks." "We are now," she said breathlessly, and I could hear the sound of papers shuffling and keyboards clicking in the background. "Daniel Rodriguez from Pharmac called right after our breakthrough last night. He said their team has been monitoring our progress, and the accuracy improvements put us over their threshold for serious interest. When I told him we were hitting 95% match rates for certain conditions, he almost fell off his chair." I gripped the porch railing for support, my legs suddenly feeling unsteady. "But $1 billion? That's insane." "It's our algorithm," Jasmine explained rapidly, her programmer's mind racing through the implications. "You know how Pharmac spent $3.7 billion on clinical trials last year. Over 80% of trials fail to recruit enough patients. Our system solves their most expensive problem. Daniel said their internal valuation shows we could save them more than $2 billion annually while accelerating their drug development pipeline by years." My mind flashed back to all those late nights, the endless iterations of code, the meetings with patients and doctors to understand the real-world problems we were trying to solve. All those moments when we felt like we were shouting into the void, trying to convince people that what we were building mattered. "But how did the Wall Street Journal find out?" I asked. My business instincts finally catching up. "We haven't agreed to anything." "That's the thing," Jasmine said, her voice dropping to a more serious tone. "I think Pharmac leaked it. Samuel thinks they're trying to establish a public valuation to justify the purchase to their board and shareholders. He's been going crazy trying to reach you. We need to meet with the legal team immediately." I glanced back through the window at my family, who were huddled around Emily's phone, presumably reading the full article. The same people who had gathered to convince me to abandon my vision were now trying to process the fact that vision might be worth $1 billion. "I'm at my parents' house," I said, a strange laugh bubbling up despite the gravity of the situation. "They were staging an intervention to convince me to shut down the company." Jasmine was silent for a moment, then whispered, "You're kidding." "I wish I was," I said, the full irony of the situation hitting me. "My father just told everyone that my sister made partner while I play entrepreneur. Then my mom got the news alert." "Oh my God," Jasmine whispered, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "That's actually kind of perfect timing." Despite everything, the shock, the confusion, the years of doubt, I found myself smiling too. "It really is." "Listen," Jasmine said, becoming serious again. "I'll head to the office now. Call Samuel and tell him I'll be there in 30 minutes. We need to figure out what Pharmac actually wants and what we're willing to give them. I'll be there as soon as I can." I promised. Though part of me wanted to savor this moment just a little longer, the moment when everything my family thought they knew about my failed venture was proven spectacularly wrong. When I stepped back into the living room, the atmosphere had transformed completely. The carefully orchestrated intervention had devolved into chaos. My father was on his phone, apparently Googling Connect Care and reading additional articles. Emily was explaining something about unicorn valuations to our bewildered aunt and uncle. My mother was simply staring at me with wide eyes, as if seeing me for the first time. The shift in energy was palpable. The same people who had gathered to stage an intervention about my failure were now scrambling to understand what they had clearly missed about my success. "I need to go," I announced, my voice cutting through the confused chatter. "There's apparently a situation I need to address with my team." My father looked up from his phone. His entire demeanor changed. The dismissive surgeon was gone, replaced by someone trying to process information that didn't fit his worldview. "Rachel, why didn't you tell us your company was in talks with Pharmac Global?" "Because we weren't in acquisition talks until apparently today," I replied honestly, though I couldn't keep a note of satisfaction from creeping into my voice. "And even our partnership discussions were under NDA. Non-disclosure agreement," Emily translated for the room unnecessarily, her lawyer's precision intact even in the face of shock. Bradley, the financial advisor who had been ready to explain why my business was doomed minutes earlier, now stepped forward with an outstretched hand and the practiced smile of someone accustomed to being on the winning side. "Congratulations. Rachel, what an extraordinary achievement." I looked at his outstretched hand but didn't take it. "Thank you, but I really need to go." Of course," my father said quickly, his tone now solicitous rather than dismissive. "This is obviously an important business matter. We didn't mean to keep you from something so significant." The irony was almost too much to bear. I looked around at the room full of people who had gathered specifically to convince me to abandon my vision, now suddenly treating that same vision with respect because an external authority had validated its worth. "Actually," I said quietly, "that's exactly what this meeting was designed to do. Keep me from my business." My father had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Rachel, we were concerned. We didn't have all the information." "No," I agreed, letting the word hang in the air. "You didn't, but you were quite comfortable making judgments anyway." Uncle Frank cleared his throat, clearly struggling to reconcile his earlier dismissal with this new reality. "Well, this certainly changes things. $1 billion valuation. That's quite impressive." "The valuation doesn't change what we've been building for 2 years, I said, gathering my purse. "It just makes it visible to people who measure worth in dollars rather than lives saved." As I turned to leave, my mother stood up quickly. "Rachel, wait." She hurried down the front steps after me, her expression a mixture of pride and something that looked like regret. "I just want to say I'm proud of you," she said, reaching out to touch my arm. "I always have been." I looked at her, seeing the sincerity in her eyes, but also remembering her silence during my father's dismissal of my work just minutes earlier. "Thanks, Mom," I said simply, unable to fully process my complicated feelings in that moment. "I'll let you know how things develop. Right now, I need to speak with my team and our lawyers." As I drove toward our office, my phone continued to buzz with notifications. The story was spreading beyond the Wall Street Journal now, with TechCrunch, Bloomberg, and other outlets picking it up. Our website traffic had apparently increased by 3,000% in the past hour. I thought about all the times I'd doubted myself over the past 2 years. The nights I'd lain awake wondering if everyone else was right, if I was being foolishly idealistic, if I was wasting my potential. I thought about Timothy walking out, saying he needed someone more stable. I thought about my father's dismissive tone when he talked about my little startup. Then I thought about Eliza, the 12-year-old who had accessed a life-changing clinical trial through our platform. I thought about Jasmine's unwavering belief in our vision, even when investors turned us down. I thought about the breakthrough we'd achieved just last night, not knowing it would trigger this tsunami of attention and validation. My entire life was about to change, I realized. And ironically, it was happening just hours after my family had gathered to stage an intervention about my failure. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of conference calls, emergency meetings, and hastily arranged flights. Our tiny office, which had felt cramped with just 5 employees, transformed into a command center as we brought in lawyers, financial advisors, and key team members to address the sudden spotlight on Connect Care. The first call with Daniel Rodriguez of Pharmac confirmed what Jasmine had told me. They were indeed serious about acquisition talks. Though they hadn't intended for the news to leak quite so dramatically, their legal team was handling the premature disclosure. "Your timing couldn't have been better with the algorithm breakthrough," Daniel said during our video conference, his enthusiasm evident even through the screen. "Our clinical research team validated your results this morning. It's exactly what we've been looking for." By Sunday evening, we had a preliminary term sheet from Pharmac outlining a potential acquisition valued at $950 million in cash and stock options. Our lawyer, Samuel, pointed out that this was less than the billion-dollar figure mentioned in the media. "They're testing to see if the publicity has gone to your heads," he explained, his years of experience with tech deals evident in his analysis. "Standard negotiation tactic. They know the technology is worth more than this, especially with the publicity driving perceived value." Jasmine and I spent that night reviewing every detail of Pharmac's proposal. The question wasn't just about the money, it was about control. "If we sell outright," Jasmine said, her eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep, "we can't guarantee they'll use the technology the way we intended." She was right. The algorithm we'd built wasn't just a clever piece of technology, it was a mission to fundamentally change how patients with rare diseases access treatment. In the wrong hands, it could become just another tool for pharmaceutical profit maximization rather than patient benefit. By Monday morning, my phone was ringing constantly with calls from family members I hadn't heard from in years. Second cousins, my father's former colleagues. Even Timothy tried to reach me with a text message that was a masterpiece of casual reconnection. "Heard about your success. Always knew you had it in you. Coffee sometime." I left it unanswered. My mother called 3 times before I finally picked up Monday afternoon. "Rachel, we just want to know you're okay," she said, her voice tentative in a way I'd never heard before. "It's been all over the news. Your father's colleagues are calling to ask about you." "I'm fine, Mom," I replied, trying to keep the edge out of my voice. "Just extremely busy." Of course, she said quickly. "We don't want to bother you, but your father would like to talk to you. He feels terrible about Saturday." I closed my eyes, remembering the look on his face as he proclaimed that Emily had made partner while I played entrepreneur. The memory still stung, despite everything that had happened since. "I can't talk to him right now," I said finally. "I'm in the middle of the most important business negotiations of my life. Tell him I'll call when things settle down." There was a pause. "He's very proud of you." "Rachel, now he is," I couldn't help saying. Now that other people have validated what I'm doing. My mother didn't argue the point. That evening, as Jasmine and I were reviewing a counterproposal with Samuel, there was a knock at our office door. To my astonishment, Emily stood there holding a bottle of champagne and looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "Your receptionist let me up," she explained, though we didn't have a receptionist. "I thought you might need a break, and maybe some legal perspective from someone who's on your side." She lifted the champagne. "Dom Perignon, partner-level celebration material." Despite myself, I smiled. "Come in." Emily sat with us for the next 3 hours. Reviewing Pharmac's terms with the sharp eye of a corporate attorney, she pointed out several clauses that would have limited our future involvement with the technology after acquisition. "If maintaining control of how your technology is used matters to you," she said, looking between Jasmine and me, "you should be pushing for a partnership structure, not a complete acquisition. Let them license the technology while you maintain ownership and oversight." Jasmine looked at me, eyebrows raised. "That's actually brilliant." "It would mean less money up front," Emily cautioned, "but potentially more control and more long-term value if the technology performs as well as you believe it will." I studied my sister, seeing her in a new light. Throughout our childhood and young adulthood, I'd viewed Emily as the perfect daughter who always chose the safe path. Now I was seeing the sharp legal mind that had earned her partnership at one of Boston's most competitive firms. "Why are you helping us like this?" I asked. Emily set down her champagne glass and looked directly at me. "Because I was wrong," she said simply. "I bought into Dad's perspective without really understanding what you were building. And because you're my sister, and I don't want you to get screwed in the biggest deal of your life just because tech acquisitions aren't my specialty." The next morning, we presented a counterproposal to Pharmac, a strategic partnership instead of an acquisition, with a licensing structure that would provide immediate capital while allowing us to maintain control over the core technology and its implementation. To our surprise, Daniel Rodriguez didn't immediately reject the idea. "Let me take this to the board," he said. "They were interested in acquisition for the simplified structure, but your technology is unique enough that they might consider alternatives." Wednesday afternoon, my father appeared at our office. He stood awkwardly in the reception area, looking entirely out of place among the whiteboards covered in code and the young programmers rushing about with laptops and energy drinks. "Rachel," he said when I emerged from my office, "could we speak privately?" I led him to a small conference room and closed the door. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched between us, filled with years of misunderstanding and the recent upheaval of everything he thought he knew about my choices. "I owe you an apology," he finally said, his surgeon's precision evident even in contrition. "I was wrong about your company, about your vision." "Yes, you were," I agreed, not making it easier for him. He nodded, accepting this without defensiveness. "I've spent my career working within established systems. When you talked about disrupting healthcare matching, I couldn't see it because I've only ever experienced the traditional pathways. But I've been reading about what you've built. It's remarkable." Coming from my father, this acknowledgement was significant. For my entire life, his approval had been contingent on following established paths to conventional success. "Thank you," I said simply. "Your mother and I—" He hesitated, then continued, "We were afraid for you. The startup world is so uncertain, and we've seen how hard you've been working with seemingly little to show for it. But that's how innovation works, isn't it? There's a long period where you're building and refining, and nothing seems to be happening from the outside. Then suddenly, everything changes." "That's exactly how innovation works, Dad," I confirmed. "The visible success is just the tip of the iceberg. Most of the work happens in obscurity." He nodded slowly. "I'm beginning to understand that. I just want you to know that regardless of what happens with Pharmac, I am proud of what you've created, the technology itself, not just the valuation." The words I'd wanted to hear for so long now felt bittersweet, colored by the timing of their delivery. "I appreciate that," I said. "But I wish you could have been proud of the work itself before external validation made it safe to do so." My father looked down at his hands, a gesture of humility I'd rarely seen from him. "That's fair. I have some learning to do about how I measure success." He looked up again. "For what it's worth, I think you should maintain control of your technology. From what I understand about your platform, it has the potential to help many patients. That shouldn't be lost in corporate acquisition." As he left, I felt a complex mixture of emotions, vindication. lingering hurt, but also the first tentative steps toward a new understanding between us. That evening, Pharmac came back with their response to our partnership proposal. They would agree to a licensing structure with a $500 million upfront payment for exclusive licensing rights, plus performance-based incentives that could ultimately exceed the original acquisition offer. Most importantly, Connect Care would maintain ownership of our core technology and have contractual guarantees about how it would be implemented. Jasmine and I looked at each other across the conference table, the weight of the decision settling between us. "What do you think?" she asked. I thought about all we had built, all we had sacrificed. I thought about my family's intervention and the dramatic reversal that followed. I thought about patients like Eliza who needed our technology to reach its full potential. I thought about the mission that had driven us through 2 years of doubt and criticism. "I think we've built something too important to sell completely," I said finally. "I think we take the partnership deal and keep building." Jasmine grinned, relief and excitement mixing in her expression. "That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say." 3 months later, Connect Care had transformed beyond recognition. Our new headquarters occupied 3 floors of a sleek downtown building, a far cry from the cramped office apartment where Jasmine and I had spent countless sleepless nights. Our team had grown from 5 to 50, with specialized departments for algorithm development, patient advocacy, clinical partnerships, and regulatory compliance. The $500 million licensing payment from Pharmac had provided immediate stability while allowing us to maintain ownership and direction of our technology. The partnership structure had proven even more valuable than we'd anticipated. Pharmac's global reach and regulatory expertise accelerated our implementation timeline by years, while our continued innovation kept improving the core matching algorithm. Most importantly, we were helping patients. Within 3 months of our expanded launch, we had successfully matched over 5,000 patients with rare diseases to appropriate specialists or clinical trials. The testimonials flooded in daily families who had spent years searching for answers, finally finding paths forward through our platform. The personal changes were just as dramatic. I had purchased a comfortable condo in the city, nothing ostentatious, but a genuine home rather than a converted office space. Jasmine had paid off her parents' mortgage and set up college funds for her nieces and nephews. We were both still working intense hours, but now from a place of choice rather than desperate necessity. My relationship with my family had evolved into something more complex, but ultimately healthier. The monthly dinners at my parents' house had resumed, but the dynamic had shifted significantly. "Pass the potatoes, will you, Rachel?" my father asked during one such dinner in June. "I was reading about your expansion into European markets. Impressive regulatory navigation." "Thanks, Dad," I said, passing the dish. "Our compliance team has been working closely with EU health authorities. It's complex, but we're making progress." Emily, who had recently taken on some pro bono work for patient advocacy groups, chimed in. "The European privacy laws around patient data are particularly challenging. How are you handling GDPR compliance?" The conversation flowed into a technical discussion of international healthcare regulations territory, where my father and sister were genuinely interested and engaged, rather than dismissive. My mother watched with a small smile, occasionally contributing, but mostly seeming content to witness this new family dynamic, where my work was respected rather than questioned. After dinner, my father invited me into his study, once an intimidating space, where he would deliver assessments of my life choices, now more neutral territory. "I've been thinking a lot about our conversation when I came to your office," he said, settling into his leather chair. "About measuring success differently," I nodded, waiting for him to continue. "I read about a patient in Cleveland who accessed an experimental treatment through your platform," he said. "A 7-year-old with progressive muscular atrophy who had been declined for 3 previous trials. The article mentioned that doctors estimated she would have had less than a year left without this treatment." "Sophie Richardson," I confirmed. Her case was particularly challenging because her genetic variant didn't fit typical profiles. Our algorithm identified subtle patterns that matched her with a trial that had more flexible inclusion criteria. My father was quiet for a moment. That's the kind of success that matters, isn't it? Not just valuations and acquisitions. It's why we built Connect Care, I said simply. The business success enables us to help more patients, but the patients are the point. He nodded slowly. I'm beginning to understand that better. Sick. One Tuesday morning, I sat in our glass-walled conference room reviewing quarterly performance data when my assistant knocked gently. "There's someone here to see you," she said. "Sophia Richardson and her mother. They don't have an appointment, but they were very hoping to meet you personally." I recognized the name immediately, the 7-year-old my father had mentioned. The girl who walked through the door looked nothing like the frail child I'd seen in medical files. Sophia had bright eyes, pink-tinted cheeks, and moved with the careful but determined steps of someone regaining strength. Her mother, Catherine, followed close behind, her expression a mixture of gratitude and wonder. "Miss Bennett," Catherine began, her voice catching. "We just wanted to thank you in person. The clinical trial your system matched Sophia with the doctors are calling her response miraculous." Sophia looked up at me solemnly. "Mom says your computer found the medicine that fixed my muscles." I knelt to her level. "Not magic, just very good at finding the right matches. But I'm so happy it helped you." "Me too," she said simply. "I can go to school now. And dance class starts next week." The Richardsons stayed for nearly an hour. Catherine explained the transformation in clinical terms, how the gene therapy they'd accessed through our platform had halted the progression of Sophia's disease and begun to reverse some of the damage. But it was the small details that moved me most: Sophia's excitement about joining a ballet class, her plans for Halloween, the ordinary childhood experiences that had seemed impossible a year earlier, after they left. I sat quietly in my office, processing the encounter. This was why we had persevered through 2 years of doubt and dismissal. This was what my family hadn't been able to see when they gathered for their intervention. That evening, I had dinner with Emily at a quiet restaurant downtown. Our relationship had evolved into something stronger and more equal over the past year. She had even helped establish the legal advocacy division within Connect Care that provided pro bono support to patients navigating insurance denials and treatment access issues. "It's extraordinary what you've built," she said when I told her about the Richardsons' visit. "Not just the technology, but the entire ecosystem around it." "We've been lucky," I acknowledged. Emily shook her head firmly. "No, that's what Dad would say to minimize what you've accomplished. This isn't luck. It's vision, persistence, and courage to keep going when everyone, including your family, told you to stop." I smiled at her directness. "When did you become my biggest defender?" "Probably around the time I realized how wrong I'd been," she admitted. "Watching you navigate this past year with such grace and focus, it's been inspiring. Honestly, I've been thinking about making some changes in my own career." "The work with your legal advocacy division has been the most meaningful work I've done." We talked about the mentorship program I had recently established for women entrepreneurs in healthcare technology. 10 promising founders were receiving funding, guidance, and access to our network resources that would have made all the difference during our difficult early years. "I remember when you first told us you were leaving tech life to start Connect Care," Emily said thoughtfully. "Dad was horrified, but I was secretly envious." This surprised me. "Envious you were already on the partner track at a prestigious firm." "Exactly," she said. "I was on a track someone else had laid out. You were creating something entirely new." She sipped her wine. "I never had the courage to deviate from the expected path." "It's not too late," I pointed out. "Your work with our legal advocacy division has made a huge difference for patients." She nodded slowly. "It has, and it's given me ideas about what else might be possible." As we finished dessert, my phone buzzed with a notification. I glanced down and couldn't help but laugh. "What is it?" Emily asked. "Timothy again," I said. "Apparently, he's launched some kind of investment advisory service and wants to explore synergies with Connect Care." Emily rolled her eyes. "The audacity of mediocre men never ceases to amaze me." I put my phone away without responding. Timothy's attempts to reinsert himself into my life had become a running joke between Jasmine and me. The man who couldn't see the value in what we were building, when it mattered now, couldn't stop trying to associate himself with our success. 6 months after the intervention that changed everything, I found myself preparing for another family gathering this time, my parents' 35th wedding anniversary celebration. The event felt different from that Saturday afternoon when I'd walked into what I thought was an emergency meeting. As I got ready, I reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past year. The struggle that had seemed so lonely at times had ultimately led to something far more meaningful than just personal success. We had built technology that was changing lives, a company culture that valued innovation and compassion equally, and a model for how healthcare technology could prioritize patient outcomes alongside business viability. The family intervention that had felt so painful had become, in retrospect, the turning point that launched us into a new phase of growth and impact. Sometimes, the lowest moments truly do precede the greatest breakthroughs. At the anniversary party, I watched my father give a speech about partnership, perseverance, and the importance of supporting each other's dreams, even when you don't fully understand them. His eyes found mine across the room as he spoke, and I saw recognition there not just of my success, but of the courage it had taken to pursue a vision that others couldn't see. Later, as I stood on my parents' back porch looking out at the garden where I'd played as a child, my mother joined me. "You know," she said, "I've been thinking about that day when we all gathered to talk about your situation." "The intervention," I said with a slight smile. "Yes," she said, looking embarrassed. "I've been wondering what would have happened if that Wall Street Journal notification hadn't come through. Would we have convinced you to give up?" I considered this seriously. "I don't think so," I said finally. The breakthrough we'd achieved the night before, that would have sustained me regardless of external validation. But it might have taken longer to prove to all of you that the work was worthwhile. My mother nodded slowly. "I'm sorry we needed external proof to see what you were building. That says more about our limitations than yours." "We all have blind spots," I said. "The important thing is that we learn from them." As I drove home that night, I thought about all the lessons this journey had taught me. True vision requires the courage to pursue what others cannot yet see. Validation from those who matter most sometimes comes later than we hope, but our worth doesn't depend on their recognition. Success isn't just about financial outcomes, it's about the lives changed through our work. The path to meaningful innovation is rarely straight or smooth. The darkest moments often come just before breakthrough. And perhaps most importantly, we must define success on our own terms, rather than accepting others' limited definitions. Back at my condo, I stood on my balcony overlooking the city lights, thinking about the next patients our platform would help, the next breakthrough our team would achieve, the next impossible thing we would make possible. My phone buzzed with a text from Jasmine. "Just got preliminary approval for the Pediatric Rare Disease Initiative. We can start the pilot next month." Another milestone reached, another step toward the vision we had held on to through 2 difficult years of doubt and dismissal. The intervention my family had staged was meant to convince me to abandon my dreams. Instead, it had become the moment when those dreams were publicly validated in the most dramatic way possible. Sometimes the people who love us most are the last to see our potential, not because they don't care, but because they're afraid of watching us fail. But failure and success aren't always what they seem. The real failure would have been giving up on something that could help people simply because others couldn't see its value. The real success wasn't the billion-dollar valuation, it was every patient like Sophia Richardson who found hope through our platform. What dream are you pursuing that others might not understand yet? What vision keeps you going, despite doubters or critics? Remember, the most meaningful success often comes after the moments when others have given up on you. The darkest hour is just before dawn, and sometimes the intervention meant to stop you becomes the very moment your breakthrough begins. Epasi tesititi.